Hello, my name is Jasmine Ornelas, and today I will be talking about the disability and justification of inequality in American history. So, to begin, the author of this section is Douglas C. Bainton. Douglas Bainton earned a PhD from the University of Iowa in 1993, became a professor for the University of Iowa, and even retired from there in 2019. He has a profound interest in the field of disabilities, which has led him to write 2 books to be exact, but has been involved and mentioned in numerous articles on this subject. His fields also include deaf studies, history of sign language, and U.S. cultural history. As I was researching about him, something that I noticed and I really liked was how passionate he is and genuinely just interested in these fields. I think that it is a great characteristic, and throughout the presentation we'll see how he doesn't treat disability as a totally separate issue, but make sure it is very inclusive, and especially with daily life. Justifying inequality. Disability has been used as an excuse to treat groups unjust, including groups beyond being disabled, groups such as women, immigrants, and people of color. Many arguments arose, and people used things such as physical, intellectual, and psychological flaws of these groups in order to label them as disabled. Disability, I think, has really just been employed as an exclusion of many different social groups, and this misuse of disability I think it was just really out there dehumanizing and attempting to control individuals. Normalcy and a social concept. A new standard of measurement was brought up in order to decide who fit into this new category. Minority groups were often viewed as social setbacks. Bainton strongly believes that disability goes far beyond a birth condition, but is also a social concept that goes against what society usually tends to define as normal, but now creates new boundaries of what is considered socially acceptable. I think with this, Bainton was really trying to emphasize how society really does have the power to define someone and the power to categorize whether they will be considered socially normal or socially acceptable or not. Normalcy was really just used as some sort of an excuse to justify unjust social hierarchies. I do think that it's great that his focus is on society being the issue and not the disabled individual. I like how he is focusing more on fixing our broken systems in the world rather than putting blame on any disabled individual. New research. So some new research that I found is that modern societies have been expected to justify these acts of inequality. In 1975, a law passed guaranteeing handicapped children in education, marking a huge inclusive shift for society within our own public education system. before researching this, or honestly before researching anything about disability, I had no idea it was an act that had to be passed. I don't know why. I assumed that our system already automatically had that kind of inclusivity, which I was wrong about. But I think that this clearly challenged the exclusive norms that had been set in society by society before this legislation. And the earlier records on the timeline, such as the first accessibility standard in 1961 and the 1975 Education for All Children Act, shows the beginning of the social acceptance for disabled individuals, shifting disability into more of a human rights issue rather than continuing to treat it as a separate issue with little to no attention. So clearly, they recognize that this is a civil rights issue, which is great, since I think that this being viewed as a human rights issue demands equal treatment and justice for individuals. And on top of that, I think that it is a good way to hold institutions and governments accountable for this. Discussion questions. So, my first question is to think about some daily barriers people with disability face, and what are they, whether they be systematically or socially. I guess a daily barrier I would say people with disabilities can face would be the lack of sign language interpreters and materials that we just have around us. And for question number 2, what are some common misconceptions you have noticed about people with disabilities? I guess some common misconceptions that I've noticed personally is the idea that if it's not visible, it's not really there. I think that that is a really awful idea to have, because it can definitely disregard the people who struggle with things that may not be as visible, such as chronic pain, or maybe just suffering from any mental health conditions. And it could be just completely disregarding those. And question number 3, do you think that people with disabilities may face barriers when it comes to keeping or finding employment? Honestly, I had never really given this question much thought. It's not something that I ever really thought about at all, but as I reflected on it more, I realized that discrimination from employers and in the hiring process is 100% possible, and it's definitely it's definitely a solid barrier that people with disabilities can face. On top of that, just finding companies or practices, corporations in general, that are not limited, that don't limit their inclusivity and support people with disabilities. So these are my sources and everything that I use to put together this presentation. And that is the end. Thank you so much for listening.